Today in the garage, we're filming live from Autotech Detroit with SBD Automotive. Let's go. Welcome to the garage. Today we're live at Autotech Detroit, the Michigan's leading tech show for automotive with SBD Automotive. We're so excited to have joining us today Andrew Hart, the CEO of SBD, and Alex Oyler, one of their analysts. Guys, welcome to the garage.
Thank you so much for having us here.
So I always like to have our guests introduce themselves.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about you and what your roles are at SBD.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Andrew Hart, CEO of SBD Automotive, and we're a research and consultancy company that really specializes around cases technologies, so connected, autonomous, shared, and electric cars. And we primarily work with car companies, helping them with this huge transition that they're having to make from what was relatively simple cars to what we're seeing now of a huge amount of complexity and strategic difficulty in deploying new technologies.
Right. Fantastic. And Alex?
Thanks, John. Yeah, I'm Alex Oyler. I'm the director of SBD North America and previously spent the last 8 years at the company focusing on kind of the building momentum behind what has now become the software-defined vehicle. So in 2015, that was really focused on kind of the emerging cybersecurity needs, and that built into over-the-air software updates, and then really the competitive pressure that somebody like Tesla brings to really rethink how you're building the cars. So that's something we've kept our finger on the pulse of overall, and a personal passion project, I would say, for me. But now I'm the director for SBD North America and manage all of our business here in the United States.
Oh, fantastic. And so tell us, just for fun, we always like to ask our guests, tell us something about you that people might not know, something interesting.
Oh, well, I used to live in Argentina. I grew up in Argentina.
That's pretty interesting.
For 6 years.
You wouldn't know from the accent.
No, you wouldn't know. And to me, that was just the most amazing experience of living up near the Andes. And so my first form of mobility that I remember is being on the back of a horse.
That's great.
Riding up the mountains. Yeah.
And for me, I grew up in rural Kansas, kind of not on a farm, but on a decent plot of land. So a different bringing up than a lot of folks.
Yeah.
But in 2015, I took the leap and joined SBD Automotive, and a few years later, I ended up living in one of the biggest metro areas in the world, in Nagoya, Japan. So wow. I've been able to enjoy the diverse range of mobility experiences between rural America and some of the densest places in the world. So just a little unknown fact.
Well, it's only fair. I guess I've got to share something about me. So let's see. I guess it was 2006. I lived in Japan for about 6 months.
Oh, amazing!
When I was at a semiconductor startup called Transmeta that you may know of. It was once upon a time it was a pretty big deal where we made Intel compatible processors in a very fun way. So there's my fun fact for the day.
Very good.
So I think first let's begin by talking about SBD a little bit. You mentioned kind of at a big picture what they do, and I think you're really well known in the industry, but for any of our viewers who may not know SBD, tell us a little bit about the scope of what you do and what you specialize in.
Yeah, so about 2/3 of our work is bespoke consulting for car companies, really helping them understand how to transition. And that can be anything from understanding consumer needs, technical roadmaps, understanding regulatory requirements, and bringing that all together into a clear picture. I think the car industry is going through such a big transformation. When you look at the push towards electrification, the push towards digitization, towards autonomy, that it can be very difficult to build up a clear idea of what needs to be done. And sometimes within big organizations, you get a little bit blinded by what's happening internally, that you lose track of what's happening externally. Right. So we tend to be their external eyes in that, and we help them stay grounded to ultimately what customer wants, but also what's happening amongst their competitors. So about 2/3 of our work is consulting. The other third is kind of off-the-shelf research and reports that we publish, around 50 titles a year. And that's, again, all around clarity and creating a kind of common understanding and language that our customers can look at and refer to and say, yes, now we know what we're talking about. And software-defined vehicles has been one of those areas that's meant a lot of things to a lot of people. So one of the first reports that Alex wrote when he joined SBD was a common Bible of software-defined vehicles and what that means and what the different levels are. And it's that kind of clarity that really helps speed up decision-making within car companies.
And kind of a Rosetta Stone to
exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, and I the Garage podcast, we focus on advanced software technologies.
Yeah.
So it allows us to focus on a little bit. You have kind of a broad range.
Yeah.
But focus a little bit into that area. And I think that software-defined vehicle area you mentioned is so important. We always ask our guests to start by saying, why do you think software-defined vehicle is compelling and important to the industry?
Yeah. I think it's almost no longer a question whether it's compelling, it's almost inevitable, right? I think we live in a world where the digital and the physical world have just naturally melded together in so many different parts of our lives. The car is one of those areas that hasn't yet fully kind of coordinated between those two worlds. And car companies have seen that disruptors are coming in and developing new types of experiences, new types of business models that are leaving them behind. And so whilst 10 years ago, success was measured by how many cars you sold, that definition of success has fundamentally changed.
Right.
And Tesla has stripped that away and said, we can sell a tenth of the number of cars as you guys can, and yet be worth 10 times more. So there's no question now in any of the OEMs' minds about the need to go in the direction of digitizing themselves and their products. It's more a question of how and who to work with.
Right.
So I'm not sure if that's...
Yeah, and if I can indulge a little bit of a metaphor here, I like to think of the automakers a bit like artists, right, that are working with certain medium today. I mean, maybe they're sculptors, maybe they're glass blowers, whatever the case may be, but what the software-defined vehicle is for them is actually completely changing the medium with which they're working. So let's say that the software-defined vehicle is a canvas. They have to relearn how to mix those oils and paints together to create new colors. Whereas in the past, maybe they bent metal. Well, they did bend metal, right, to make the cars. It's more than that now, and so it's not just one thing. It's relearning how to the fundamentals of the business.
Yeah, it's a mindset change, isn't it?
Correct.
That maybe a couple of years ago, we would have seen this through the lens of technology. Now it's much bigger than technology. And that's part of the challenge. If it was just technology, we would have it by now. But it's ecosystem, it's organizational change, it's business model change. It's so many different facets.
And I think everyone, when they hear software-defined vehicle, it's like the parable of the elephant. You know the parable of the elephant?
No.
5 blind men come upon an elephant, and one guy comes to the leg of the elephant, he says, oh, it's a tree. And one guy comes to the trunk of the elephant, and says, oh, it's a snake. And one guy comes to the side and says, oh, it's a wall. But it's the same thing. It's just they're coming to it from a different perspective. So I think when you talk about software-defined vehicle, I think people hear and think different things. One person thinks, oh, OTA updates. Or one person thinks, oh, you're going to charge me for services. One person thinks, oh, the vehicle's going to get better. And I think they're all right. But they're all kind of coexisting. And how do we get through that and get people to realize, both consumers, I think, as well as tier ones and OEMs, that there's a full transformation kind of that has to happen, right?
I don't know if you want to say that one.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you. And if maybe we start with an inward look, and I think that's counterintuitive to maybe how it should be. You always want to start with the consumer, what they want, and evolving the product to sort of what their demands are. So in the SDV report that Andy was talking about earlier, one of the things that we try to do to bring clarity is actually define what the software-defined vehicle is. And of course, it's more than just the technology. Yes, you've got the electronics and electrical architecture, and you've got the software that's running on top of that, and then the abstraction between those. But beyond that, there are so many enablers and changes within the business that have to happen to make the software-defined vehicle a reality. The development process, the development tools, the organization structure, all of these are important elements that have to be changed in order to make sure that the vehicle not only comes to market, but that it can be iterated and monetized and valued, being driven to that customer over the lifetime of the car.
That's great. Yeah, look, we're voracious readers of your reports at Sonatus, so we really appreciate your hard work.
I hope you got a copy on your bedside table.
Maybe not that. My wife might not go for that.
Coffee table, at least.
Coffee table. There you go. Coffee table. So I'm happy to say we have a lot of fantastic guests. Recently, we had Stefano Marzani from AWS. I know you know him.
Stefano's great.
And I was recently watching an episode of his podcast called All Things Automotive, where you were a guest about a year or so ago. And I really appreciated a point you made, which is talking about the journey, if you will, to software-defined vehicles, not as if a binary bit of a bit flip, but rather a continuum where there's gradations of the kind of the full promise of software. And so I'd love to hear your perspective both about that spectrum in general. Maybe you could reintroduce that, but also thinking about it 1 year on.
Yeah.
How have you seen the industry and OEMs through that journey, that complicated journey?
Well, why don't you talk through the spectrum, then we'll talk about where we are.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's kind of this 40,000 foot view of that journey of the software-defined vehicle, and we've defined it in 4 stages, or 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. So vehicle 1.0 is kind of the standard car you see on the road today, a bunch of ECUs integrated together by a bunch of disparate teams that you can't really iterate or update the software capability in any meaningful way. The first real step on that software-defined vehicle journey that we've seen from the mass market is sort of towards digitalization, or vehicle 2.0. In that case, really, we saw the ability to update software within the infotainment system, to deliver new experiences through connectivity, and then to drive additional sources of revenue for automakers through things like subscriptions. That's really been the journey of the last 5 to 10 years. And where we are now is what we've called vehicle 3.0, or the updatable vehicle. In this context, the car, yes, the ECUs they can be updated over the air, but it's really kind of a stepwise journey towards a software-defined vehicle, because it's not really scalable software development. It's very difficult to add features to these ECUs, and more than anything, it's difficult for automakers to completely rechange their architecture or build from the ground up a brand new architecture that's capable of really representing the ideal software-defined vehicle. So right now, it's really kind of a Frankenstein of the updatable vehicle. And then what we see as 4.0 is the software-defined vehicle, where a majority of the functions in the car can be updated over the air, whether that be the configuration or the execution of them, the HMI, the quality, and making sure that the vehicle is responsive not just to the driver to make a personalized experience, but also that service improves over the lifetime of the car.
And the architecture is a lot more sophisticated, I'm guessing, at that stage. You've got service-oriented architectures, you've got much more on the edge, so it's seems like a more multifaceted type of architecture.
That's right. And maybe the biggest thing in all of this is the maturity of the tool chain, right?
Yeah.
Because before now, the traditional automotive supply chain and a lot of the software suppliers that operate in that were really developing tools and products that were oriented to that vehicle 1.0, vehicle 2.0 mindset. So it's taken time for the software supply chain to say, we need to completely rethink how we're kind of supporting our customers with the tools that they need to kind of go further along on this journey. Yeah. And that's where companies like Sonatus come into play, where you provide tools for OEMs to more sustainably and more scalably implement software.
So, and I think likewise, when you talk about that development tools, I think the idea of developing software that works on one exact hardware block for perpetuity is a completely different challenge than anticipating. Like we were on a panel yesterday talking about how you have to anticipate the applications you don't even know about yet, as opposed to what you're doing just today.
Mm-hmm.
But you asked about kind of where we are a year on. I think if you look at a macro level within the industry, OEMs have fully embraced this. They've made a number of announcements of huge programs, massive organizational changes, big new teams being built up, commitments to build their own OSs, commitments to speed up the digitization. I think that rush over the last 12 months has hit a few brick walls where they've started to realize, well, actually, this isn't about throwing money or people at it. I think some of those OEMs that made big proclamations and took on ambitious levels of insourcing are now starting to realize that there's a fundamental change in mindset, in culture, in the environment that's required within their organizations to be able to support their technology strategies. And that's the hard bit. That's where a lot of the work now is starting to focus on, is how do you change that culture, that agility, that way of working, while still operating business as usual. They still need to make cars. And most of those cars today aren't software defined in the way that Alex just described it. Right. So they need to keep both their current businesses moving to sell cars, to make money, to make profit, while somehow carving out a new part of the business, which is a completely different being with a different DNA, different way of working, different way of partnering. And that kind of slight schizophrenia within an organization can create fractures and tears and can make things painful. And we're seeing a lot of pain within OEMs. which is natural. I think the key is to find the right balance, the right speed, the right partners, the right business model, so that you don't break what you've got, but you still make good steps forward. And that's what we see right now, a year on. A lot of OEMs are trying to find the right
kind of growing pains about the process. And you mentioned a couple of things there. One is you mentioned the right partners, and then you also mentioned earlier about bold steps and extensive insourcing. And I think if I slightly oversimplify, what I think I've seen over the past couple of years is the vast majority of certainly your larger OEMs are saying, I'm going to do everything myself. You see Carriad, and you see Woven Toyota, and so on, where they're largely trying to take everything themselves. But it seems to me you're now seeing a shift back where they're saying, well, actually there's some challenges there. And I think there feels like there's an opportunity for sensible partnerships to solve parts of the problem.
Yeah.
Is that what you're seeing?
I think what you generally see, and we've seen for the last 15 years, especially since the advent of connectivity in cars, is a regular swaying from outsourcing to insourcing within the OEMs, and over swinging on both sides.
Yeah.
And so OEMs that have kind of committed a lot more to insourcing, normally what happens is that they face challenges, executives start to get a bit nervous about how much money is being spent, they start to question why so much has been done in-house, and they'll swing, and sometimes they'll overswing. On the other side, you'll see kind of teams that suddenly feel tied down to one supplier or one partner and feel, oh, we should be more independent, and so they start swinging the other way. Right. So there's always this swinging. I think what they're trying to reach is a good balance, and a few OEMs have achieved that, but it takes a lot of, I'd say, maturity and knowledge at an executive level to trust that that's the right way. And that's the hard part, because executives within most of the big OEMs don't have a strong background in software. So they see things through kind of different lenses. And so when you say to them, okay, is this the right strategy? It's like, I don't know. So the temptation is to swing another way, or someone else comes in and says, oh, we should do that, or we should partner with them.
But I think maybe the key insight or the key recognition that's happened now, and it was always there at certain levels, but I think there is now kind of a lockstep alignment across a wide majority of the mass market OEMs, is we need to focus on building differentiating software experiences. So once they say, this is our brand, these are our brands, for each brand, this is our identity for that brand, and here are the features, the experiences, the capabilities that we're building out that feed into that sort of that brand value. That's the stuff that they want to insource, right? That's the IP that they want to own.
Right.
And now the thinking is going towards, okay, we will have our software developers focus on iterating on that and building kind of mature iterative experiences. And then we'll work with our partners to integrate different parts of that non-differentiating enablement stack, like the tools and the platforms.
Yeah. But there probably isn't a one-size-fits-all, right?
Absolutely.
I think every OEM is going to arrive at slightly different conclusions as to what's the right balance and what's the right partnership network, based on what their own strategic goals are, what their reach is, their volumes. So many of these things come into play that says, okay, this is the right level of software-defined vehicles for us, and this is the right strategy for us based on what we want to achieve. It's going to be interesting as different OEMs try different things.
Yeah, I think so. And you mentioned differentiating and non-differentiating, and we make a lot of infrastructural components, underlying technologies that we think are super important to enable the kind of evolving software-defined vehicles you mentioned. But nobody's going to buy a car because of the infrastructure. But the infrastructure is critical.
Yeah.
So why do that in-house when there's so much differentiating stuff that you need to do, as Alex said, to provide your identity and your unique value prop? So I think that's where we feel like there's some happy medium that can be achieved.
There is, yeah. I think there are other factors beyond cost and differentiation that have played into their historical decision-making. It concerns around security, the agility or lack of agility. There's a bunch of other factors that determine whether they should go in-house. Sometimes it's a matter of pride, right? Sometimes there are teams that want to be able to demonstrate that they can do that. And politics plays a big part of it.
Sure.
So it is quite complicated, and from the outside, it can be very difficult to see how they landed at that decision. But normally when you sat down or when we worked with them, you can kind of start to plot back how they landed where they did. Whether or not that's the right decision, that's where they are, and that's where they're starting from. Yeah.
Yeah. When we talk with OEMs and tier ones both, there's always that that sort of pride issue, or they want to make sure that they can show their own differentiation. And so a lot of our focus is showing them that we're really enabling them.
Yes.
We're a very high-paid step stool, I guess, or something like that, if you think about that analogy, where we're really helping them to get, our slogan is accelerating vehicle software innovation for a reason. We're not trying to replace them. We're not trying to eliminate them. We really want them to succeed faster and achieve their goals quicker.
Yeah.
So pivoting over to another topic is, I'd love to think about, if we step back and say, what are the killer apps for software-defined vehicle, or perhaps another way to think about it is, what are the key unmet needs that you see that are still out there that can help to drive this forward? Where do you see the focus right now?
From an ecosystem point of view and a supply chain point of view, one of the unmet needs that OEMs have is knowing how to do all of this transformation in the right order, in the right way, that isn't going to sink them. So if you think of, right now the priority is mass electrification. That's eating into their margins, making them less profitable, but they know they have to do that. And on top of that, they've been told, you're going to have to digitize. You've got to become software defined to be able to deliver a lot of these things. And you've got to develop autonomy, and you've got to do this. And now AI is coming along. And there's a lot of one thing over the other that's creating this massive amount of pressure and cost and affecting their margins, right? So I think as an ecosystem, recognizing their reality and being able to demonstrate how software-defined vehicles can actually save them money, and how to calculate that ROI and build that into their equation so that they don't feel like this is just cost. So I think that to me is an unmet need right now, is A, recognizing that they don't need everything in every vehicle, and B, demonstrating how what they do need is going to save them money over time. I haven't seen many suppliers in the ecosystem being able to show that from an OEM's point of view that really resonates.
I think there's also, part of that really is having a better set of tools to democratize value creation. I feel like an MBA grad saying that, but to democratize value creation amongst the different teams within the OEMs to take advantage of the software-defined vehicle, right? So if you have, a much more capable compute platform in the car that's running, all these different enablers, data collection platforms or aggregation platforms, et cetera. There might be organizations within the OEM that can create value or optimize costs from that don't even know it's there, right? So just having everybody aware of what the vehicle is capable of, and then giving them the tools to optimize their costs or create value with that, is kind of low-hanging fruit overall, I would say.
One example from that's come out in this event has been around. There's been a really strong presence of telecom operators. And the reason for that is there's so much more data coming in and out of the car, but that data is normally linked to a contract within the OEM. But the users of that data within OEMs can be really varied. It can be after sales team, or it can be the engineering team, it can be the purchasing team if it's selling data, whatever it is. Each one of those is a separate business model. So being able to help the OEMs split up what is one big data pipe into smaller chunks and find ways of creating more distribution within the OEMs of ownership of that, and allowing that contract to be more flexible than maybe what it is at the moment. That's an unmet need, I think.
It's a recurring problem where when there's a shared service, and you see this with development tools, you see it with lots of other areas where, one BU has to sign the contract, and so he doesn't want to be stuck with it. He's waiting for some. But central purchasing is like, they have to create a kind of a kairetsu of multiple companies. So I think this is a real challenge. We've demonstrated on a lot of our products the ability for, once their product's deployed, you can actually put it in the hands of multiple groups simultaneously in a non-conflicting way. And by doing that, hopefully make the case to every one of them and purchasing at the same time that this is going to benefit all of you, and no one of you has to take the bets on it.
And it's interesting. I think software-defined vehicles breaks a lot of the classical commercial models and the kind of pyramid type structure that we had before. And in doing so, I think we're going to have to find much more creative commercial agreements between suppliers and within organizations, between different teams, to be able to make all of this work. So I think that's some of the growing pains that OEMs are also going through on the back end.
Speaking of the telecom and the data aspect, which is very close to our heart, we do a lot of interesting work with creative data access. One of the fun things we've developed is a tool that allows multiple data gathering policies to coexist.
Okay.
And so you could almost take each of those policies and provide billing to the respective group within the company that provided it to allow that kind of division, if you will, of the bill. So it's interesting, and I did observe that all three of the big telecom providers are sponsoring the show. It's an interesting observation.
Yeah, they've come in heavy.
Yeah.
It's like the 1990s again.
What about you, Alex? What about unmet need or killer app you're seeing or things that are driving SDV?
Yeah, well, ultimately, and there's a lot of ways that it's being called features on demand, features as a service, subscription-based revenue. Ultimately, it's really about creating new revenue streams from existing assets and platforms. The software-defined vehicle is the killer app for that, but the threat is a bit more existential than maybe it has been over the last few years. The costs of electrification for these OEMs and the amount of capital that they're pumping into electrifying their portfolio is really staggering. 10 zeros, 11 zeros in some cases, and if you look industry wide, it gets even more ridiculous. So there's a real strain on the OEM business model to keep cars being produced that are profitable, that go into consumers' hands, that are supported and scale well across the globe, while also kind of transitioning their existing platforms or their existing portfolio to the software-defined vehicle platform. If you look at profitability targets for OEMs, a lot of that hinges on creating these new revenue streams that the software-defined vehicle is really the vehicle for, so to speak. And that's not something wrote like the heated seats. That's become a bit of a trope in the industry, right? And maybe there could be a model in which that makes sense. But if we think about what consumers want today, how they view the purchase of the vehicle, the type of money that they're paying for that, ultimately what has to happen is a reimagination from the OEMs of the business model with the customer, and then using the software-defined vehicle to differentiate experiences for the different types of customers. Those could be fleet operators, they could be drivers for gig operators, they could be taxi drivers. Of course, there's your personal vehicle buyer, and then within that, you've got your people who lease your vehicles, who buy them. All of them are paying different amounts of money for different features at different price points in different segments, and they all want different things. So you can really use the software-defined vehicle to differentiate how you offer that, what comes baseline, and then what comes on top of that. And then what's happening below that is actually the cost savings of being able to standardize the electronics and electrical platform that's being offered to all of these different customers. So that's really what it comes down to at the end of the day for the software-defined vehicle.
I think a killer app to enable that is probably a new customer engagement model. I think most OEMs have only ever sold cars to dealers who have then sold cars to customers. And their relationship with consumers have been relatively limited, the touch points.
Right.
And so they haven't had to learn how to maximize engagement, how to optimize a bunch of KPIs that would deliver the types of ongoing revenue opportunities that companies like Netflix or companies like Apple have become really good at doing. They are still quite traditional sales companies from...
Sure, and even Tesla's selling effectively direct to consumers, almost effectively, more so than most. So and they have a much more direct relationship, I think.
Absolutely, but I think getting much more sophisticated around that whole customer experience and lifetime value is going to mean developing kind of really sophisticated business teams and capabilities and tool sets that can drive KPIs like engagement, like lifetime value, those kind of KPIs that at the moment are a bit foreign to most OEMs. Right.
This has been a fantastic conversation, guys. I like some of those last closing points, especially, Alex, about the different ways that cars effectively can be used and purchased and paid for and sold. I think that's compelling. So thank you so much for joining us in the garage.
Thank you for having us.
I really appreciate it, and I'm going to continue to be a voracious reader of all your hard work.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
So thank you for joining us today in this episode of The Garage, live from Autotech Detroit. I hope you don't mind the background noise, or perhaps you didn't hear too much background noise. We've done a good job with our sound editing. But we're so grateful for our guests from SBD Automotive who talked about a wide range of perspectives on SDV and where they're going in the future. If you like what you're seeing in the garage, please like and subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you in another episode again very soon. Thanks very much.